Sports Lawyers Association. Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Maureen Weston. I'm professor at Pepperdine University School of Law and a proud board member of the Sports Lawyers Association. On behalf of the SLA, we welcome you to today's webinar on emerging issues in international soccer. It's going to be an exciting discussion of all of the legal issues and events that are happening in international soccer. And I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Patrick Reilly, who's a partner at Faegre. And again, welcome everyone. And we invite you to enjoy today's session as well as many of the other sessions we have, including our annual conference that will be happening in Los Angeles in May. Thank you, and take it away, Patrick.
Thank you, Maureen. Appreciate it. And happy Friday to everybody. As Maureen mentioned, I'm Patrick Reilly, a partner at Faegre. I'm in Indianapolis and practice in sports law, sports litigation, and products liability. And in case you're wondering, so I just had a birthday. And so my colleagues came while I was out and decorated, ransacked the office behind me. And so that's, why it looks like what it does. But anyway, you're not here for that. You're here to talk about some of the emerging issues in international soccer, also known around the world as football. I think this is the third or fourth year we've done this in the summer for SLA. And I always find it's a really good time to do that, given that our American leagues, as you'll hear from John and others, the MLS and the NWSL are in full swing. We just had a really successful women's Euro tournament that you'll hear more about later from Michaela and others. I think today is the start of the Premier League season, and I think La Liga, which is Spain's premier division, as Alvaro will talk about more, starts in, a week, I think, Alvaro, is that right? And of course, this is a men's World Cup year, which you'll also hear about. So look, a lot of stuff going on in soccer right now. And so that's why we have a panel of esteemed experts from around the world to discuss. So our panelists today, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to name who they are, and then I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because they'll do a far better job than I would, and then we'll get into some of the conversation. One reminder for those of you who haven't attended one of these before, this won't be a surprise to you, but there's a little chat box. There's a chat box and there's a Q&A. And I'm not sure if the Q&A is working, but at least for the chat box, if you guys have questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them into the chat and they'll do their best to answer. Obviously, they're not going to be sharing any state secrets today, so please keep that in mind as you ask your questions. So without further ado, today we have Michaela Clicque, who is Senior Legal Counsel at UEFA. We have John Tshiamala, who is Legal Counsel for Major League Soccer. We've got Alvaro Gomez de la Vega Jimenez. Hopefully I said that right, Alvaro. He's a sports legal manager at RCD Espanyol de Barcelona. And we've got Enrico Errol Angeles, who's a partner at Magtibay Law. Enrico, hopefully I got that right, or reasonably right. And Enrico, special props to Enrico. He's joining us today. What time is it, Enrico? Tell everybody where you are, what time it is today that you're doing this.
So I'm in the Philippines. So it's 12 hours advance New York time. So it's 11 p.m. over here. But I'm glad to be with you guys.
Well, thank you, Enrico. And Alvaro and Michaela, same to you. I think 5-6 hours ahead of time for you guys. So again, appreciate you joining us. And of course, John as well. So why don't we kick it out this way? Enrico, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to Michaela and Alvaro and John. And if you could just kind of give us a little bit of background on yourself, kind of what do you do and kind of how you got there. And then after that, I'll kind of get into, kind of what a typical day and week is like.
All right. Good day, everyone. Like I've said, I'm here in the Philippines. I'm Enrico Errol Angeles, a partner in Magtibay Law and a FIFA mediator. So I became a lawyer back in 2012. And just like any other lawyer, the first thing that you'll do is go to a prestigious law firm thinking that all is good. So after 4 years, I felt like there can be something more. I'm really a sports fanatic, so I figured, why not take my master's? So fortunately, Columbia University and ISDE offered a sports law, sports management program. And it's perfect because it was in New York. So back in 2016, I enrolled in that program and met the who's who in the sports law industry, from NFL to MLS to NBA, even to UEFA and FIFA. part of the program, we even went to Switzerland, visited UEFA, visited FIFA, visited the International Olympic Committee, visited CAS. And also part of the program, we had to get an internship. So I interned in the Asian Football Confederation in Malaysia. So it's the UEFA counterpart in Asia. So for those who are not familiar with AFC. So after my internship, I graduated, then went back to the law firm. I thought that was the end of it. Sports law is such a niche practice that it's not really that familiar in the Philippines. But fortunately, due to the connections that I was able to build in the network, both in my master's and in my time with the AFC, FIFPro engaged my services to establish a professional football players association here in the Philippines. So we started it around 2-3 years ago. It has its growing pains, but at least we're starting somewhere. And together with other sports lawyers here in the Philippines, we kind of want to cultivate a sports law practice. So we started drafting a sports mediation, sports arbitration, ADR in the Philippines, alternative dispute resolution. And then just last year, when FIFA opened an application for possible mediators all over the Philippines, all over the world, I was fortunate to be selected as one of them. So although we only had workshops till now, hopefully everything will take flight soon and handle more FIFA-related cases in the future. That's it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing, Enrico. All right, Michaela, I can't remember who I said next, but how about you?
It's a tough one now to continue after Enrico. So yeah, my name is Michaela Clicque, or as everyone actually refers to me, Michi. I studied law in Vienna. And then I found out, so same like Enrico, I also started in a law firm in Vienna. And then I found out about this master in Spain, which is called ISE. I think it's maybe it rings a bell for some. So I've done my master in Spain, in ISDE, and then afterwards I was very fortunate to straight away manage to get a position in UEFA. But it was a bit of a particular position. It was basically I was contracted by UEFA, but working in the FIFA premises in the player status department together with Alvaro at some point, where we shared very, very nice moments. Yeah, so I gotta say I was quite fortunate, but I think a big part was as well what I can give always as an advice is language part, because I think all three last candidates which were up for that job were from my master's edition, which was 2013, I think, yeah, 2013, and I think a big part was basically that I had all three UEFA languages and then some others, so that helped me a lot. Then I was working at player status.
Sorry, before you go on, what are those three languages, just in case everybody's wondering?
For UEFA,
yeah.
It's French, English, and German.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No worries. And then, yeah, I think I worked for around 2.5 years in the player status department, where I was dealing with contract, like with solidarity claims, training compensation claims, and contractual claims, so from out of transfer. And then I was basically transferred back, as they say here, to UEFA, and I started working in the statutory and regulatory unit, which may sound maybe as a first place like a little bit what do you do, but basically what I love about my job is really that we have on a daily basis different things to do. So as it says, we are in charge of all regulations and the UEFA statutes. So wherever there is I think we're going to get to this later probably, but for my daily work, but let's say broadly speaking, I'm like in charge of all regulatory matters within UEFA, and this since when did I change? 2017, yeah. With all this COVID, I'm starting to miss the years.
Yeah, you and us both, yeah.
Yeah, 2017, and since February, I actually overtook my units, the statutory and regulatory unit. So I'm now in charge of my units, and yeah, that's basically a little bit my background.
That's great. Thanks, Michi. Appreciate it. Okay, Alvaro, since you two know each other, why don't you follow Michi?
Yeah, my name is Alvaro Gomez de la Vega. I'm from Spain, and I'm a Spanish lawyer in Madrid's Bar Association. So I finished my studies in 2011, and I did my master's in international law for the legal practice. So when I finished, I had absolutely no idea that this university in sports law existed. So it was because I met who would be a future colleague in a job fair, and I was interested in a law firm he was working at. So I checked his profile on LinkedIn. I saw he was working in FIFA. So I decided to send my application. I was lucky enough to get selected after a really hard process. And I was lucky enough to share an office with Michaela Clicque, back in the days, Michaela Pietraszko. And well, we were in charge of what she said, training, compensation, solidarity, contribution claims. And I was also in charge of employment disputes between players and clubs, and coaches and clubs. So basically a lot of work. We were assisting the arbitrators that work in the FIFA bodies. So it was a really nice job. Then I switched to a German law office in Lisbon, specializing in sports law. And I was there for almost a year when I received an offer from a Spanish football club in Malaga, who got relegated to second division, and I started working there. And at the end of my stay there, I was the legal manager, after a really chaotic process because that club left so many anecdotes, but it was a chaos. And during COVID, I got another job offer, and I ended up here in Barcelona, in Espanyol. And I'm basically the sports legal manager. I'm in charge of every sports related issues with players, also with the intermediaries. I have a lot of job. I also have to deal with sometimes with UEFA licenses, with the issues of the Royal Spanish Football Federation. So basically a lot of work. Now it's a little bit like hell here in the summer, because it's like with the summer market transfer. Well, it's crazy how much work do we have now. But I really enjoy this field. I really appreciate having been invited here, because it's my pleasure to share my experience with people overseas.
Yeah, thanks, Alvaro. We know you're a busy man. Okay, John, last but not least, why don't you tell us kind of what you're doing, how you got there, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think we've all kind of had the same traditional path. So I graduated law school in 2011, and like everybody else, like Enrico mentioned, I just went to work for a law firm, and I was there for about 7 years. And in the middle of that time, I realized that all I spent my time doing in my free time was watching football, soccer, all the time, talking about soccer, reading about it. And so I started to look into how I could, transfer myself over into the soccer world. And so about about the summer of last year, I just randomly met one of my friends who happened to work for Major League Soccer. And so, I was able to kind of swing that into a position. And I'm at the litigation department at the league. And a lot of what I do is, I oversee outside litigation. So anytime the league is sued, we oversee outside counsel. I also work in building out and revising a lot of our policies, whether, it's corruption related policy like FCPA, whether it's the travel and entertainment policy, and especially because we work a lot with CONCACAF and a lot of the other, governing bodies, just making sure that, all of those interactions are according to the rules. I also work in player discipline. Obviously, if there's some misconduct, we sometimes use outside counsel, but sometimes we do it in-house. So I think it's just a matter of that. So I kind of call myself a kind of a risk regulator when it comes to the league, right? I try to ensure that the league doesn't get sued, or the league doesn't, and no one around the league is essentially I'm protecting the shield. So that's how I would view my role.
Yeah, that's great. So you're the risk regulator, and then if the risk escalates, then you handle it, right?
Yeah. then we call people like you, Patrick.
Yeah, nobody likes that. Well, that's great, guys. Thank you. So I often think it's really helpful to kind of take a peek behind the curtain as far as kind of what is a typical day like, if that's even possible to articulate, or what's a typical week like, or a month like. I know you guys have all had, kind of a lot of things going on this summer. And so maybe it's not necessarily kind of common, but just kind of like, what would a day-to-day, week-to-week look like for you, kind of in your role? So Alvaro, why don't we start with you?
Well, during the regular season, my Mondays are basically trying to measure the damages of our hooligans, because sometimes when we play at home, they sing some naughty stuff. So they have proceedings against us, disciplinary proceedings in La Liga and in the Spanish Football Federation. But basically, we have during the summer is what the thing gets interesting. So today, for example, I woke up. We're having a transfer agreement that we have to close before night, and I had to deal with the drafts. Also, I received a claim from a player that has to be. I have to deal with that as well, and they gave us a really short deadline. And always with the phone and my laptop with me, because I need to pay attention and with everything that goes on, because the thing is that it's very hard to find a routine, because it's all unexpected and things go very, very fast with the sports director and with the CEO. So
yeah, that's interesting, Alvaro. I want to pick up on that, if you don't mind. And you corrected, I think, a good part of my question, which is, how different is your schedule, in season versus out of season?
It's completely different. I mean, during the season, I can take also care of some of the business stuff of the team, with the sponsorship agreements, with daily business, day-to-day business stuff. But during it's very different, and I have like a fixed schedule during the year, and during the summer it's from dawn to sunset. So
yeah, that's pretty wild. Okay, Enrico, what about you? What's kind of your day-to-day, week-to-week, or month-to-month schedule look like?
Unfortunately, I don't think my day-to-day or even month-to-month work is as exciting as the rest. Because considering that I'm still working in a firm, so I still handle regular cases. It just so happens that every so often we would get to be appointed as arbitrators for any sports-related dispute here in the Philippines, or get to review contracts for some of our athletes that we are representing. But other than that, it's your typical law firm. Practically everything and anything under the sun, from corporate matters all the way to good old-fashioned litigation appearing in court. So yeah, it's not as exciting as the rest.
And do you think that will be different when there are competition, like for instance, like a World Cup or a competition such that, there could be more arbitrations or mediations or things like that that'll pop up that are FIFA related?
Personally, I don't think so, because most of these will be referred to like a specific arbitration panel or committee specific for a particular tournament. So in our case, I think what FIFA envisions for the mediator, at least for us mediators, is to handle any disputes between probably players and agents and or clubs. But for now, considering that we are still in the process of fixing all the rules, thinking on the proper process on how we should go about the mediation process, it might take some time, probably in less than a year, hopefully.
No, that's helpful. Thank you, Enrico. Okay, John, what about you? What's your schedule look like? And maybe like Alvaro, it's different depending on whether it's in season versus out of season.
Yeah, it is very different. So when we're out of season, there are a lot fewer fires to put out. So I think that's the time where we kind of sit back and we try to anticipate, what rule changes we want to make with respect to competition, or, especially with COVID, going back and forth, making sure our COVID policies are up to date, our tampering policy, and also dealing with the union in terms of any changes we want to do with respect to, player discipline. So I think in the off season, we have a pretty set, it's an easier schedule, I would say, because, we can come in, we actually have time to kind of think and sit in meetings that are kind of forward looking. During the season, it is very much all hands on deck, right? So I think, you know, it depends on what's going on and what time. So sometimes it's prepping some of our executives for meetings with the owners. Sometimes it's prepping, you know, our business folks in terms of interviews that they're going to have with outside, and it's also dealing with the union if we have to do player discipline. So I think you know, when we're in season, you know, everything I have on my calendar basically changes by the minute, kind of like Alvaro mentioned. So I think that those are the kind of the two ways that I look at it. But you know, everything for me, it's very exciting, right? I do like the fact that I'm not doing the same thing every day, and it is also interesting for me to delve into issues that I would otherwise never delve into, you know, especially getting very deep in terms of how COVID spreads. And you know, now we're also anticipating what we can do, what we need to do with respect to monkeypox, right? Because that's a very different risk and threat compared to COVID. So
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Good caveat there. Okay, Mishi, if you can give this as well, but if you can not go into planning the Women's Euro 2022, because we'll cover that a bit later. Like, what does your job look like other than that? Although obviously you've had a couple of different tournaments and things like that you've helped with as well. So kind of what is your day-to-day, week-to-week like, but maybe also generally kind of what's it like, you know, for competitions? How does that kind of throw things into a wrench?
So yeah, I would say like as a general layer is basically we are in charge of reviewing the competition regulations, like we have for every edition, for every season, if this is basically, let's say, the basics. And on top of that, on our tables as well, our biggest, how can I say, decision-making organ, which is the Congress. So we are in charge basically of the Congress, of the content, that everything is legally properly done. So that's, let's say, the basic layer. And then when I say we're in charge of the regulations, the statutes and so on, everything that you can imagine, which has anything to do with UEFA, which touches upon any kind of set of regulations, comes to us. Be it a problem, be it a question from a national association, be it a question from a club, be it any issues related to a match which happened. I don't know, was this player eligible? Was the kit, the equipment, was it correct? And most of the time, unfortunately, it's not a straightforward case, obviously, as you can imagine, but it's always like interpretation, long meetings, everyone is sitting around the table and we're trying to find a solution, the best way forward and the most practical one. So that's basically, let's say, on a daily basis. And exactly what I think that my colleagues mentioned before, it's exciting. Of course, it's draining. Sometimes you're like, oh man, another problem, another issue. But also on the other hand, it's like, oh wow, cool, another issue. You know, it's something different. It's you come in the morning and you know you have no clue what's gonna wait for you that time. And I think also, like Jonathan mentioned, COVID was a huge thing for us. I think we had to change our protocol. I know we're on version 7. And I remember in the beginning, we were sitting with these medical experts and with all sorts of stakeholders, and there were like these dreadfully long meetings where we would obviously you try to make everything right. It's impossible. You won't make everyone happy, and so. And also afterwards with all these testing programs and so on, there was so many issues. So really on a daily basis, we had so much to do with that. So I would have never thought that I'm going to become such a big expert in COVID matters, but now I'm a bit of the smarty pen of the family, and everyone's already annoyed when I say something because I was like, no, I've been at this meeting with the medical experts and they said this and that, you know. So that's what I like about my job, is that you never know what can happen. You constantly learn new things. You're trying to adapt. You're trying to sometimes really survival mode and trying to really find the best practical way. And I think that's what I learned over the years as well. So that's really what drives me, what keeps me driving in that job.
Yeah, no, that's hilarious. Thank you, Michaela. So, okay, I want to move into something, some of kind of hot topics that I think people may be wondering about, and really kind of like what these are, and possibly kind of what are the legal issues that are kind of bubbling under each of these. I wondered if we first start with kind of NFTs and fan tokens. And Enrico, I wondered if you could kind of start us off with this, and then maybe we can see if John or Alvaro have kind of thoughts on this as well. And really, our audience may be wondering, for those who kind of don't know, NFTs, fan tokens, like why would we be talking about this when it comes to international soccer? Like what what is the connection here? Can you kind of lay the groundwork here as far as kind of why we'd be talking about this as a topic, and then maybe anything interesting about it that you're seeing?
Well, I gotta admit, I'm a NFT fan. I collect Top Shot and All Day.
So you're the perfect
Unfortunately, not
person to
yet
lay the
soccer.
groundwork.
Well, for me as a fan, first and foremost, I mean, it's another way of collecting sports memorabilia and being in touch with other sports fans all over the world. And it's a good fan engagement, at least what I see from both Top Shot and All Day, although it's for American football and basketball. Like, they have these certain instances wherein if you manage to collect a certain number of NFTs, or if you manage to get this particular NFT, you get a bonus NFT, something like that, something to that effect. So I understand that possible issues there would be copyright, name, image, and likeness issues. Another possibility is securities, considering that I'm not actually sure how regulated it is in the US or even in the other countries. But here in the Philippines, it's pretty much not regulated at all. So people are saying that it can be used for even money laundering or things like that. But for me personally, it's just that it's just sports fans being crazy sports fans. Before, we're collecting NBA cards or MLB cards or even football cards. But nowadays, with this new invention, quote unquote, and it's an easier, faster way to collect things, and in a good way to engage the fans for any kind of sport. I think NFTs are here to stay, and it's just a market waiting to boom, especially here during the pandemic.
Sure. No, thank you for setting that up. I think that was a great introduction. So Alvaro, why don't you then kind of take us through from kind of a club perspective, or at least, somebody who is, at a club, how are NFTs and fan tokens kind of affecting, football, international soccer, kind of where you see it?
Yeah, well, now the clubs are trying to implement this, but also in Spain, it's not very well regulated. And also it's deemed in many companies as a pyramid fraud. But I think it's the future. So because with these crypto coins and cryptocurrencies, we're seeing that they're getting more and more often in transactions. So what the clubs intend to do is to have their fans using like these NFTs as something that they can use inside the club and to buy merchandising and these sort of things. But it's at a very early stage. There are very few clubs that have taken the next stage. I think Valencia is one of them. And also there are many companies that they are investing as a sponsor, sponsorship agreements to start with, and then get into the NFTs implementation. But because the Spanish government forbid the betting houses to become sponsors in Spanish football, so I think they're starting as sponsors, the NFTs companies, and then I think many clubs will take this business model with their own social mass.
Thank you, Alvaro. To the extent I'm curious, when you mentioned Valencia, do you know what they're doing as far as kind of taking that next step?
I'm not working there. I'm not very sure what they're doing, but I think they're like making these NFTs to buy like things inside the club. But I'm not sure.
No, I realize you're not necessarily the expert on Valencia, but yeah, I just kind of caught my ear on it, so that is interesting. So at least look out for them as far as kind of what they're doing in the space. No, thank you, John. Okay, from your perspective, kind of from the state side, or what you're seeing in MLS, kind of how is the NFT fan token kind of I guess in your world right now? How has that affected it?
Yeah, and I think, to Enrico's point, I'll start with fan tokens because those are the ones, where everyone's kind of waiting. So I think right now we're waiting for the SEC to kind of make a ruling on whether those count as securities or not. And I think right now everyone in the space is kind of preparing for the actuality, whether it's, whether it is a security or not, because of the ability for engagement, right? So I think the way I look at fan tokens is really a good way to engage your fans, because you can have them vote on issues, and then you can activate programs with the fan token when they come in. It could be part of the stadium experience. It could be part of, getting people to be really excited, not just to watch the game, but to come to the game, to deal, especially in the off season when, there aren't that many games going on. So you can use fan tokens as a way to kind of keep the momentum going while the season's off. But for right now, I think everyone's being very cautious. And until the SEC comes out with any kind of guidance, I think everyone's kind of waiting and not making any kind of monetary trades with that. With respect to NFTs, this is a good way to generate revenue. So I think a lot of, I don't know if our teams, I don't know how many of our teams have done this yet, but I know that a lot of other sports leagues, especially in the US, are signing sponsorship deals with a lot of NFT. I guess I don't think they're manufacturers or whatever. NFT people who create NFTs, right? So then that way,
right.
Then that way they can create the team's NFTs. But there are a lot of sponsorship deals, whether it's stadium rights deals or jersey front deals. So I think that's the way that NFTs are going right now. But I also think that once the teams get into it, I know that there are shops like Socios and So Rare that are really trying to get in that space to really get and just make sure that the blockchain that's backing the NFT is legitimate. So I think that right now it's mostly for just sponsorships, but to Alvaro and Enrico's point, it will move forward towards actually getting those into the hands of consumers.
No, good discussion. Thank you, guys. And again, if anybody in our audience has any further questions about that, feel free to drop it in the chat box or perhaps put it on LinkedIn or something like that. It seems like it's a discussion for the future that we're going to be having probably next year or the year after, et cetera. Well, I'd be remiss if we didn't kind of circle back to the women's Euros that Misha, you guys just organized, and it seemed like, at least from an outside perspective, it went off just really well, and it was really well received. Speaking of fan engagement, so I wondered if you could kind of take us behind the curtain a little bit of kind of what that was like. What sort of issues pops up for you, that type of thing, and kind of just your kind of experience with that.
So first of all, I have to say the very big issue which came is obviously the whole movement, because moving the whole competition as we had this thing called COVID, which happened. So it was a tremendous job actually on the side, more on the business side, to my colleagues that had all of these contracts, be it things that you don't think necessary in first place, be it hotels, all sorts of things in that regard. So it was a huge workload on them in that sense. So they have pulled up a massive job there. Then obviously the women's competition department, which have done a tremendous job in promotion. And promoting, I think Nadine, the face of Nadine Kessler, former world's best player in the world.
Yes, right.
Exactly. She's very great in like really pushing the value and the women's football, the game, really forward, and really in promotion is incredible. Her job she's doing there. So this was obviously a tremendous job which they managed there. In terms of issues, obviously we thought maybe in April, I remember we had the first discussions. Do we manage to completely abandon the protocol, which we have decided against? We still abandon a lot of obligations. So let's say our protocol kept going, however, with very minor obligations, and most of it was strong recommendation. And then, as you know, in June, it started to get up again, the wave. So it was a little bit of a concern, obviously, that we had as well. How are we going to go for the tournament? Do we manage to go for the tournament? And also in that sense, what we have included in the competition regulations as well, rules. What happens? We have this famous 13-player rules, which we also had for the men's Euro, and also for all our UEFA competition, basically, in case due to COVID-related reasons, if the squad would drop below 13 players, including one goalkeeper, then obviously the match would not be able to go ahead. And then just really to establishing clear rules, who has then the responsibility, who would lose match by forfeit and things like that, just in order to be ready, because you never know what could happen. Obviously, that would be always the last resort, because you don't want to have a final tournament and having a match decided by forfeit. So everything should have been done on the pitch. So these kind of issues, obviously, a lot of emails, a lot of letters to the teams in order to still keep a best practice behavior. But on the flip side, I have to say, and I think that comes out as well out of media and so on, in terms of disciplinary matters and so on, in terms of fan behavior, in terms of also team behavior and things like that, you cannot really compare it with the men's sports, because you've seen the final, you've seen the matches, the atmosphere in the stadium always very positive, not at all hostile, not at all aggressive or whatsoever. So no issues in that regard, as well. Very, very minor issues from teams' behavior whatsoever. So that's a very, very positive point in that regard. So yeah, I think overall it was a great success. And personally, even me, being a female representative, let's say, I'm very, very happy to see how it developed and where it's going to.
Yeah, and thank you, Michi. We were talking before the panel started today about what the U.S. playing England, right, in that game, selling out just kind of, very, very, very quickly as a result of kind of the buzz that's been generated from it. So obviously a continued success. Well, let's transition to the men's World Cup, which is obviously coming up later this year in November, I believe. And I guess this is for any of you, although perhaps we'll start with Alvaro here, kind of is there any issues that we think will pop up with the World Cup, or are there any things in particular that, you'll have to kind of be mindful of, for your position on potential players going to the World Cup, et cetera?
Well, it's going to be very disruptive with the competition. And as I told you, it's like mixing Mentos and Coke for the first time, because it's the first time that this is a new experiment, and let's see how it's going to work. From the club's perspective, it's not the best scenario, of course, because in the middle of the league you have to free these players, because the FIFA regulations force you to do it. And once they are summoned by their national team, there's nothing you can do. Even if they participate with your team, you will get your match with a negative result as a sanction. And also it's the thing with the injuries, so that we have to deal with players that maybe have a very severe injury during the World Cup and they're not available to play for the rest of the season. And for us, it's very disruptive, as I said, and it's going to stop our competition in mid-November, I think. It's the 9th of November, the last match, and then we're getting back in New Year's Eve. So I think it's going to be very interesting how this works. It's the first time that World Cup is organized during the autumn winter, and but I think the best scenario was, of course, in summer, and also the deadlines are shorter this time, because normally when the league here in Spain ends, the last match normally is in first division in mid-May or by the end of May. And then the World Cup starts in June and the last match is in July, but then you have 1 month and a half until the next first match of the next season. So it's going to be very tight. And well, for Espanyol, it's not a big drama, because I think best case scenario, we will have like 2-3 maximum players participating in the World Cup. But for teams like Real Madrid or Chelsea, it's going to be a big drama, especially taking into account with the UEFA competitions, which Michaela works. So,
yeah, I think that's a really good point. And John, I wonder if we could go to you now, because you, Alvaro, and I were talking about this the other day, right? And it's kind of funny, the difference, right, between kind of how it's affecting you guys, the Major League Soccer, MLS, versus Alvaro. Given that, as Alvaro said, it's normally takes place during the summer, So normally it'd be much more disruptive for you than it probably is right now. So why don't you kind of give the perspective of kind of how it's affecting you guys and your teams and your players?
Exactly to what you said, Patrick. I think this had an impact on us when it was announced. So, obviously we had some time to plan around that. So our season actually ends, I believe, right at the cutoff. I think it's 2 weeks before, we have to release the players. So for us, it's not going to impact our season as much, but I think it is going to impact us in terms of load management for the players that do come back. So, we do have across all of our teams, there's going to be a fair number of players that are going to be traveling to Qatar, joining their national teams and then playing. And, with the heat and, the anticipated loads, I think that that's something that, our medical team and our medical group is kind of looking into in terms of next season, right? In terms of how do we reacclimate players that did go to the World Cup, come back, should we make some rules in terms of how much more rest time those players should get versus everybody else? But in terms of impacting our season itself, it's not going to have that major of an impact because we already adjusted the dates accordingly in anticipation of this problem. So.
Great. Michi, I wondered if we could come to you next as far as how this could potentially affect, some of the competitions you guys run, whether it's Champions League, Europa League, things like that. Any perspective on, again, kind of how it, kind of touches your world?
Yeah, it's the same as Jonathan mentioned. I think it's very similar to us, but rather like in a negative way, unfortunately. So we planned obviously ahead. We also tried to squeeze in everything, but we're starting our group stage from the club competitions. So UCL, UEL, and UECL we start in September. So we had to squeeze 6 match days, which we usually manage to spread out nicely between September and December, within this little window between September and November, which obviously is not easy, which poses a lot of issues because we have match day after match day. If there's disciplinary issues, we have to be very quick because if they affect the next match day, the decisions need to be taken very quickly. If there's appeals or things like that, it's getting a nightmare because it's you need to work with very, very short deadlines. So yeah, not ideal, let's say this way.
Yeah, no, that's probably right. Enrico, any other thoughts as to kind of what issues may bubble up for the World Cup coming up, or what things that people should be paying attention to?
Well, for me personally, I think it's more of the fact that the venue. So people will, I'm not sure if most of the football players will be as familiar playing somewhere in Qatar. And the weather would be so much different from what they're used to. And I guess for football, given the fact that due to the difference in timing, due to the fact that it will affect their commitment to the club, it will be a huge commitment on the part of the football players. And of course, at the end of the day, as much as they would want to represent their countries, it will also affect their livelihood. So those things would greatly affect, considering with the different World Cup that we're having now. And I would just like to point out, Patrick, it's the first time that the Philippines, although it's the women's side, qualified for the World Cup. First time, either men's or women's.
Well done.
So we qualified for the World Cup, first time ever. So
congratulations.
See you guys in Australia and New Zealand. That's it.
Well done. That's awesome, and I'm glad you shared that. Okay, speaking of the World Cup, there's a really interesting question here from one of our audience members named Elizabeth Gonzalez, and so I'll read it out to you in case anybody has some kind of initial reactions here. In your experience, do you believe the non-classification of any national team to a FIFA World Cup, as in Qatar, may affect the player's transfer market for that national team or association? Does anybody have any reaction to that?
I can answer that. If a player has a really awesome performance, of course, in the World Cup, his value increases. So of course, it does affect to a club and to a player and to a national association getting qualified to the World Cup. I mean, it's a game changer in my opinion, and of course, it affects clearly.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Alvaro. Does anybody else have any other thoughts? I think that's right. Alvaro, you're our transfer guru here, so that makes sense that that you would answer that. Thank you very much. One of the things I want to touch on is the fact that we are largely an American audience with our Sports Lawyers Association here. So, but obviously, the way that a lot of our sports work in the U.S. is different than the way that a lot of international soccer works, and the fact that there's no draft, there's no college system, things like that. And Enrico, I wonder if we could start with you here. If you could kind of contrast the two kind of different systems, either pros or cons of each, or other thoughts as to kind of, should we be going more towards a European international system or vice versa? And just give us your kind of thoughts on that.
Okay, fun. That's just really interesting, considering that's really one of the subjects that we usually talk about with my classmates before, because most of my European classmates would always say that American sports always incentivize losing. So they incentivize losing. So you let teams stack so that they get a high draft pick with the hopes of improving in the future, something like that. And Europeans, at least most of my European classmates, didn't appreciate that, considering that they think that clubs, or at least the teams, should figure it out on their own, sign the players that they need, and not tack, because for them it affects the beauty of the game, whether it's in basketball, football, or even in soccer. But I guess what at least the Europeans don't understand when it comes to that is it's a totally different market. Considering that there is a huge influx of players coming in from college, and that some small market teams would really need the high draft picks in order for them to improve, and they don't really have the financial capacity to sign players off the bat. Like, we all know that some players would really prefer playing with the big cities, New York, Los Angeles, and just the big sports teams. So I guess there has to be a way. I unfortunately I can't think of any right now wherein sports teams, not as good sports teams, can improve without giving them an incentive to tack. So, and that's where at least the European model comes in, wherein if you don't improve, you're forced to improve. Otherwise, you're going to get relegated, and then relegated to a free division, which unfortunately does not exist in the US. But I would defer it to you guys, because you guys are more familiar with both the US and the European sports market. It's just an observation that we usually talk about with my classmates during my time in Colombia.
No, I think that's really well said, Enrico, right? Because obviously, as you mentioned and said so well, right? If you can't be really incentivized losing in an international system, because you are going to be relegated, and that's not going to be good for anybody. So obviously that promotion relegation system is just completely different. Alvaro, I know you're a big American sports fan as well. What are your kind of thoughts on kind of the way that we do things with some of our sports versus kind of the promotion relegation system, et cetera?
I think the American system is amazing. It's to be honest, it's a very fair system based in good sports decisions. If you choose right in your draft, you will have an awesome player. Then you can trade him by another 3 players, whatever, or with rounds for the draft. And it's also based in a very solid college competition system.
Yeah, I think we had Alvaro freeze a little bit, although
on the one hand, it's good for the clubs. It's good. Okay, it's good for clubs. It's good for franchises. It's good for the colleges, and it's good for the athletes who, before starting a professional career,
Yeah, poor Alvaro. I think it's breaking up again.
Maybe it's not the case always. Okay, wait. Now can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. So it's good for all the parties involved, and it's based in a solid college system. It's based in education. It's based in giving the athletes something that they can do after finishing their careers. And I think it's a very fair system that we should copy in Europe. But to give you a fair perspective of how the Europe.
Yeah, I think Alvaro, unfortunately, you're breaking up again. I think I really think that's an interesting perspective and a good corollary, Alvaro, right? You hear that.
For example, in Spain. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think you were breaking up there for a second. So
sorry. No, the thing is that here in Spain, the clubs became professional as of 90s. Before they were like associations of, and now they became as of the 90s private companies. So we need to learn a lot from the US, and we need, I think, to copy that draft system, because with these relegations, with these transfers, every bad decision is covered by money, and the rich will always win.
Yeah, it's interesting, Alvaro, right? You hear this argument, John, when you hear this kind of, especially on the state side, when a lot of times in the NBA or kind of other sports like that, where they talk about, quote, small market teams, and, how are they going to actually be able to keep their best players? And it's really, drafting well and, being able to kind of use those assets appropriately. But obviously, to Alvaro's point, if we didn't have the draft, then perhaps they wouldn't even have that opportunity to have the asset, to begin with. So any thoughts on this kind of from your perspective?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, yeah. No, I think it's, I think to Alvaro's point, right, is, I think the draft and, having salary caps are all built towards, stopping money being the #1 driver of success. And I think if you look at European sports leagues, that's exactly what's happened, right? Like, I mean, the English Premier League, yeah, is touted as the best, the most commercial league. But at the same time, they pay 3 to 4 more times the amount for the same player that would cost half as much in France. So I think, I think that there are pluses and negatives to each system. So, but I think, which one is more fair? I think it depends on where you're coming from. If you have money, then you think I should be able to spend it all. And if you don't, and you're in the minnows, you should say, hey, there should be regulations to try to help. And I know that the Europeans have tried to do that with FFP, which I'll let kind of discuss that, right? So, but, I think it just depends on where you are. And I don't think that there's a right answer, but I think, there is a fairer way of doing things than just having money win.
But if I may jump in, and if I may disagree
Please.
with my colleagues, so I'm telling you, myself being a huge football fanatic since I was a small kid, I have to say what I loved as well to watch on TV was not only the top fight, which sometimes was very quickly decided in some leagues, but what is very, very cool, and especially in Germany, for example, was always relegation time, So it was really like the fight, and then we would watch really the playoffs and relegation and so on, which is once you have that, the league established already on the top, it's not interesting anymore, and the middle ones. So it really becomes something really great, and it's something that a lot of people are following here. And also this thing with the money, I don't 100% agree, because there's a lot of clubs which do spend millions and millions and millions and buying all of the big ones. And there's still sometimes these moments, and I think this is where everyone's football hearts just light up, is when the small ones then kick them and manage to still get over them. Or so it's I think that's the big issue of the clubs that have the money, because they would always go with the big names and tend to try to acquire these big players. But then what the smaller ones do, or maybe the ones that are not so much not so fortunate with money on their side, is that they are doing a good scouting program, and then they manage to get the little stars, and then they get up as well. So that's also very interesting to see. So obviously I am a huge promoter and fan of this relegation system and so on. And what I think as well is what I maybe is a little bit pity for the US system is a very, very, very small percentage in the end which manages to get into the professional world, no? Because you have just this league, whereas we have this huge system in every national association, every league, which have 5 leagues or whatever and so on. There's so much more opportunity in the end for them to end up, and you don't need to be one of those that wins the millions and millions, but there's so many people that are playing football on a professional level earning fair money, which they can live with, not maybe on a star level, but still they can still do whatever they loved and whatever they grew up with. So that's just some of the pros that say. Obviously, I understand that there's a lot of cons.
I'm glad you jumped in, Michi. Thank you. Alvaro, last word on that topic? Or
I have to
Enrico, too?
I have to disagree with Michaela, because this is the Racing Rats trying not to lose the first division status. And then you have the worst scenario in Germany, that it's Bayern FC winning every single year of the competition. So that's it. Maybe people are losing interest in football because of that, because you are, the thing that engages fans the most is winning. Even like the FA Cup or La Copa del Rey in Spain, but avoiding relegation doesn't end up well for many clubs. So I have to disagree with my dear friend.
Enrico, last word on this?
Yeah, Patrick, I just wanted to add, it's just interesting that we're all looking at it on a team's perspective. But if you flip it on the player's perspective, at least on the European system of things, a player can choose which club he wants to play on. Unlike in the US, wherein if a team drafts you, technically that team owns your right. And you can't really play for any club that you want, for any team that you want, unless you demand a trade, which will immediately give you negative backlash, or you'll have this reputation already. So I guess it's just fair to see it on both sides, on the team's perspective, and at the same time on the player's perspective, wherein you get to choose whichever club you want to play for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad you. Oh, hold on, John. John had a quick.
I just want to say that it is temporary, right? So I think that the draft, the hold on the draft, I think that they've made the rookie contracts shorter for that reason, right? But I think the ability to trade is the same everywhere. Right? Once you sign a contract, then you kind of lose that right. But I do think the draft is temporary, just to have some stability. But that is a fair point.
Well, clearly this is a topic that we find interesting, as you guys can tell. So I'm glad that we had that discussion. So I know we're running low on time. I think we've answered, hopefully, the questions that we've been asked. But I think the last one I want to kind of throw around to you, kind of some parting words, and really, any advice for those who want to get into kind of the legal field in soccer. You guys have all had different routes to get there, and if you could just any parting words on this topic. About getting into this and getting into the soccer world, or any other thoughts, that'd be great. So why don't we start with you, Michi, and then we'll go around.
This is a difficult question, because I have to admit for myself it was a lot of luck involved, definitely being on the right time, right spot. If I can add something, what I said as well in the beginning, I think at least in Europe, it's very important to have probably a lot of languages, and then it's the network. You need to try to get into somehow the getting into the network, getting to meet one person. Once you have that one person, it's like a domino effect sometimes, and then just your performance. Just try to convince people with your performance. Just try to straight away from day one give your very best, and then it's just the luck at the end as well, which has to contribute.
Yeah, that's great. Enrico, what about you?
I guess what sets me apart from the rest of the panels, that I'm coming from a country which is not really that much into football, to soccer. So my advice is, at least for those similarly situated, is to broaden your horizon by either attending talks like this, taking further studies wherever that may be, maybe in another country, either in Europe or in the US. And then during those time, build up your network. You'll never know who can help you get in touch with whoever, or who can get you in a job wherever. Like in this case, the only reason why I managed to be a part of the panel is due to my classmate Megan, who I think was part of.
I think she was
he was
on
a
there.
participant. Yeah, he was an attendee a while ago.
You owe Megan a big thanks for
So
a couple of different ones. Yeah.
Without Megan, I wouldn't be connected to Patrick, and without Patrick, I wouldn't get to meet all these wonderful people who are part of the panel. So build your network. You'll never know. I mean, a simple hi or a simple connect in LinkedIn would do wonders. there.
Yeah, well said. Alvaro?
Well, I think you need to be humble, you need to be patient, and you need to be a solution provider. If that's for the first step in your career in football as a legal counsel. I think many people are very focused on the picture, on getting to big transfers, and you need to go step by step from the very bottom and try to provide something to your employers that makes a difference, and to make their lives easier, of course, because nobody is going to give nothing for free. So I think especially to have this good mentality of providing hard work, and not to be focused on where you want to be, and to be focused on where you are at.
Great. Okay, John, last word.
Never give up. That's all I have to say. Just never give up. You never know.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much to our panelists. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Looks like Melissa just put in the chat, we have a sports shorts on Tuesday, August 9th at 5:30. And again, hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll talk soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.